on with Ron. Hi, Gig.
Hi, how's it going?
Okay, we're having a great time here at the Pacific Design Center here.
Oh, is that where you're at? How's the weather in Los Angeles?
It's really beautiful today. It's in the low 70s, and it's just one of those ideal Southern California days. Where are you at?
I'm actually up in Fresno. It's also low 70s. Very bright, very sunny here.
Nice.
So let's get started here. Where did you come up with the idea for Copperhead, and what attracted you to the why you came up with this project?
Well, over the 25, give or take, years working on Gettysburg and then Gods and Generals, I came to realize in a way that maybe I didn't understand when I started the gig that taken together. They're a cinematic meditation or a cinematic exploration of why good, honorable, ethical men go to war. I had an example of such a man in my life because my father enlisted and fought in World War II, North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and he was a really good guy. I mean, he was a dear friend and a wonderful father, and a man of character and a man of ethics. And you have to ask yourself, why does such a man get involved in something as horrible as war? Uh-huh. And so that was kind of explored in those two movies. And so whether they were wearing blue or gray, you can't come away from those movies and not have an understanding of how such a man could get involved in such horrible circumstances. So during the time of making those movies, another question was gestating, which is the other side of the coin. Why do good, honorable, ethical men choose not to go to war? And in fact, the very same war of these men that I had been exploring and bringing into life on film. And so that question was really big in my mind when I came across the Copperhead. I wasn't looking for the Copperhead, but when I read it in my constant reading of Civil War fiction, it just fell on fertile ground because it became enormously interesting. Here was a story of such a man, who, as we know from the novel and in the movie, is against slavery, understands what an evil it is, and looks forward to its abolition, loves the United States, and wants to preserve the Union. But in his view, war will only make it worse. War is not the solution. So this became a very intriguing character for me to explore because it's within the context of where he is, in his village in upstate New York. He's a minority, it's just his family. It's him and his family who have this position. So it became an exploration of dissent. And dissent to me is always an interesting story, whether it's Galileo or whether it's the first people who translated the Bible into English, Wycliffe, or any of the people who in Salem who were saying stop burning the witches. The dissenter is always a character that fascinates us, and in our particular society, in our culture, it's protected. Our founding fathers codified it in the First Amendment. So this question of dissent became very potent in the context of one of the two good wars. I mean, most Americans, when they look at our history, there's a consensus that the two good wars, the ones that had to be fought and had to be won, the sacrifice was worth it, were the American Civil War and World War II. The other ones we argue about. And so here's a guy who's in one of the good wars, that is saying, no, it's a mistake. So this became fascinating for me as a filmmaker, and I think it's, by extension, going to be fascinating to an audience.
Now, when you tried to adapt it from the book, did you have to cut certain scenes out that didn't fit well onto the screen?
I don't think we cut anything out. We did change. We did change things at the very end because we felt that the ending in Frederick's book we felt was a little too neat, and we felt that the stakes were higher. And when you look at the Civil War, and if this movie can be seen, and I think it can be seen in a certain light as a parable for the Civil War, then you cannot remove the cost. The cost was astronomical. And as you know, it's being revised upwards every year by historians based on the new research. Now it's upwards of 700,000 dead, and then a huger numbers wounded and casualties. So if you look at the real war, you cannot then make a metaphor for the war or a parable of the war and not have a commensurate cost. So when Bill and I looked at that, we came up with a different ending, which raises the stakes. But other than that, there's great fidelity to the characters, to their dialogue, and to the line of the story.
Now, with many audience members, when they think of a Civil War movie, they're expecting, great battle scenes and recreations, and so on. Why did you take on this project with where there's none of that stuff for a Civil War movie?
Yeah, well, it's a few reasons. First of all, personally speaking, there's a feeling as a director of been there, done that, and I know how completely demanding it is to shoot those kind of scenes. I mean, logistically, it's just hugely demanding. What you see on the screen is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the apparatus to move those people around and get them fed 3 times a day. It's really huge and very costly. But also in terms of just as a creative artist, that stuff was very challenging, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, I studied a lot of war films before making Gettysburg. I studied Kurosawa and Bondarchuk and the great directors who have done, Charge of the Light Brigade, you name it. I saw all those movies again, even if I'd seen them before.
Yeah.
And you see what works, what doesn't work, and then try to, bring your own personal identity to the filmmaking. But we're standing on other people's shoulders all the time, whether we know it consciously or not. And we're not about to reinvent the wheel. It's all been done a million times before. It's a matter of serving the story, telling the story. But those big battle scenes, they were just very intriguing and challenging, and we had a lot of fun. I don't know if fun is the right word, but they're hazardous. You got real explosives. People can get hurt. You got real bayonets, real cannons, real muskets. There's a certain danger involved. So you have to proceed cautiously and carefully, so you're not hurting a human or an animal. And I'm happy to report we didn't ever hurt anybody. But looking ahead, I thought, I want to explore different areas. And so what I wanted to explore, as I said, was this whole issue of dissent, and also wanted to explore the home front. The home front, we got into it a little bit in Gods and Generals when we were with the Beale family in Fredericksburg, when we were with Anna Jackson in Lexington, when we were with Myra Hancock in Maine. But it was still about the men on the battlefield. And so this time around, I really wanted to spend time with the families at home. So usually when the soldiers leave to go to war, the camera follows them and goes to war. Here the soldiers leave and go to war, we stay. So I think it's so different in that way that I think it's just an entirely new window in terms of the popular culture, in terms of cinema, into a world that we've rarely seen. And when we have seen the home front in movies, it's almost always been the home front in the South, because it's where the South was where the war was fought. The South was where homes were burned to the ground. It's where the armies marched. But we've almost never, I can't even think of another movie that's been at the home front in the North. And what we see is that even though the war wasn't fought there, they suffered too, because even though the war is off screen, there's no escape. No family escapes. When you think of the horrific casualties, no family in America escaped that war. So I think this is just opening up a different window onto the same circumstances.
Now, what kind of extra research did you have to do for Copperhead?
Well, different research, because we didn't have the military historians with us the way we had on the other to get the battle right, who was where, the flanking move, all that stuff, which you've got to get right, otherwise you're going to hear about it from a lot of people. And I'm not saying those 2 previous movies are perfect, but we strove for perfection. We had historians look at the script, historians were on the set, So, if we made any mistakes, they weren't big mistakes because we had people checking on us all the time. On this movie, it was a different kind of research. What was 19th century rural life like? So we had to get the look right. And then, as you notice in the film, people are always working. So we made a choice. They're never sitting around. They're always working. So they're either tilling, or they're sowing, or they're milking, or they're shearing. I mean, they're constantly, even when they're inside, the women are knitting and darning and sewing and repairing. They're preparing food. So you have a sense of the community always at work. And if they're not at work, they're in church, singing, praying. That the church was the center of the community. Or if they were at leisure time, they were entertaining one another. They're playing fiddles, banjos, not banjos. Banjo is a southern instrument, but they're playing fiddles and flutes and wooden flutes and barn dances. So the recreation of their world was very, very important. And that's almost between the lines of the script, to root these people in a real environment, in a real routine, in real relationships. And then the other layers where we had to get it right was the time. I mean, even though it's a work of fiction that we're dealing with here, the characters are fictional, it takes place in a real world. It takes place between the spring and the fall of 1862.
Yeah. When
certain things happen, they refer to certain real historical events. They refer to the Battle of Antietam. And then there's the fall election of 1862. And we, as you know in the film, report that with great detail. We even say who won, how many votes they won by. And there's a scene where when they're reading from the Herald Tribune, and that was a huge victory for the Copperheads, for the anti-war movement in that fall election, which was a congressional election year. So some historians say that had it been a presidential year, Lincoln would have been defeated. The peace candidate would have won. That would have been the end of the war. They would have negotiated a truce. So the Copperhead movement actually crescendoed, hit its zenith a year later in the spring of 1863, and then it was capped and kind of turned around by the military victories that are being commemorated this year, Gettysburg, Vicksburg, etc., because nothing succeeds like success, and the mood in the North shifted. But in 1862, it was still in its ascendancy. So all those references we have to get right, and also the voting. The details of the voting, how people voted, the way they voted tickets, Democratic ticket or Republican ticket, the colors of the ballots. We were amazed to find that the colors, the Republicans were red and the Democrats were blue. Would you believe it? In 1862, those were the color of the badges.
Oh, really?
Had to be meticulously researched.
Wow. That is a lot of research. I mean, this is going to be your third, practically your third Civil War movie. Are you a Civil War aficionado yourself outside of all this?
Well, I've become one in spite of myself. I didn't. It's not. I wouldn't have been otherwise, because I love American history, world history. I love reading about the Roman Empire and about the ancient Greeks. But in terms of my filmmaking career, it's just that I've spent so much time in it, reading about history and fiction and spending with historians, that I guess some of it's rubbed off on me. And at least I don't claim for 1 minute to be a Civil War historian. I would never claim that. But as a filmmaker, I'm probably a little more versed than your average Hollywood filmmaker. I'll give you that.
Wow. Now, the perspective of a descent is an interesting perspective, especially since most war movies of descents are more of recent movies, especially in today's political climate. People are much more going to be more accepting of a descent movie, especially towards a Civil War or anything earlier than that. We don't usually hear of descent of war in much of American history before Vietnam.
First of all, let me say that, as I'm sure you know, Civil War history is a full contact sport.
Yeah.
And having been buffeted about, on my last film for having the audacity to portray Confederate officers as human beings and not cardboard cutouts, I understand that there will be some criticism leveled at this movie from all sorts of sources, which I cannot even guess, because some people regard the Civil War, as I alluded to earlier, as settled. The good guys won, the bad guys lost, the slaves were emancipated, the Union was saved. End of story. We don't want to talk about it. Well, fine, but that's not the reality of history, and that's also not the reality of the way we live our own lives. Everything's under review all the time. Everything's on the table all the time by historians, by journalists, by citizens. And when you look at the Civil War or even the Mexican War, look, Abraham Lincoln, when he was in Congress, was a dissenter to the Mexican War. You can read it. Public statements in the newspapers and on the floor of Congress. He argued against the Mexican War. We've always had dissenters. He called it, Polk's War. And he wasn't the only one dissenting against the Mexican War. You had, certainly in the American Revolution, you had the Tories. Mm-hmm. They thought, excuse me, we're raising arms against the King's troops. The War of 1812, you had dissenters. New England almost seceded over the War of 1812. So in every American conflict, you've had dissenters. But what happens is, as we know, the victors write the history. And once a war is won, you say, well, it was won, everybody must have been for it. No. and I think future filmmakers will be looking south of the Mason-Dixon line to make movies about the dissent in the South, in the Confederacy. People who did not want to secede. People who did not want to break up the Union. People who were against slavery in the border states. Not just the border states, but the cotton states. They're fascinating stories yet untold in the popular culture. Neither the Confederacy nor the Union were monolithic. You had a great diversity of opinion, and the dissenters paid a price because, as we know, whether it was Vietnam or whether the current wars, if you're in the minority that says, I don't think the war is a good idea, people look at you funny, and in some cases they even call you a traitor. Yeah. And that's as true today as it was in the 1860s.
Wow. Now, as a fan of myself for Gettysburg and Gods in General, I mean, I must have seen Gettysburg, at least 24 times when I was younger.
Oh no!
So I've seen God in General several times myself. I certainly do love your movies, and I do have to ask, and on behalf of a lot of your fans, is are we ever going to see the final conclusion with Last Full Measure?
Well, I would love to do the third part of the trilogy. It's a big movie. Like the other two, it's in the epic genre, which is a different genre than Copperhead. Copperhead is an intimate movie, more stylistically in keeping with movies that we're used to seeing these days. It's in the 2-hour time range. If we make Last Full Measure, it's another epic movie. Part of the epic is the time it takes to tell a story. And because it has to cover the wilderness, Petersburg, and Appomattox, it's going to need, 3+ hours again, and a big budget. So, I never say never. It's not even on the back burner. It's on no burner right now. But if Copperhead does well, then all bets are off. Because then the people who invest in these kind of movies can say, hey, maybe there is an audience for Civil War material. I mean, Copperhead cost $10 million, so it's a reasonable budget in terms of what we hope to do at the box office. But when you make a movie for $50, $60, $70 million, you got to do major business. And so we'll see. I think Copperhead will go a long way. The response, the box office to knowing whether Last Full Measure will be made or not.
So no conversations with Ted Turner anymore?
I talk to Ted Turner all the time. In fact, I'm going to see him tomorrow night because we're having a benefit screening in Atlanta for the Atlanta History Center. I called Ted Turner up when we were setting up these special advanced screenings, and I said, Ted, we want to do a screening, pick your charity. Well, we've done like 20 of these screenings for Wounded Warriors and other groups, and he picked the Atlanta History Center, and I'm there just because we're pals. I love the man. Without him, neither one of those movies would have been made. He is a great guy. He gave me total creative freedom. He gave me final cut. I didn't have it contractually, but he gave it to me. He's one of my dear friends, and so I'll be seeing him tomorrow night. But who knows? Anything can happen, as we've seen. But certainly, if Copperhead does well, it enhances the chance for Last Full Measure.
Okay, terrific. And one last question: since it has been a while since you have done movies, I have to ask you: after Copperhead, what will be your future projects that you may be working on?
Well, the one one that's on the front burner, but you never know in this business. You could have it be on the front burner and suddenly be on the front burner 20 years later.
Yeah.
But the one that's on the front burner now is a picture called Belle Star. It's a Western, a classic Western. The difference being that the lead is a woman. And it's based on the book Belle Star, written by Spear Morgan, a terrific book. And, we got it slated to go next summer. So check back with me next spring, and I'll let you know if we're in pre-production.
Okay, terrific. I appreciate your time and speaking with me. I wish I could have met you in person. I would love to pick your brain about the Civil War. I just completely love your movies.
Well, if I ever get to Fresno, I'll give you a holler. But I get to L.A. a lot, even though I live in Virginia. So I'd love to meet you, and I really appreciate your time, Gig.
Hey, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.